All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. Welcome to another one of the Wizer webinar series. This one's going to be a fun one. We are going to have a long and rather engaging conversation about insider threats and the challenges, trials, and tribulations that go along with that. Everything from the human side, the technology side, and all things in between. I am very, very fortunate to be joined by some amazing guests. Gabrielle, you put together a pretty awesome panel on this one. I got to sit back and put my feet up on this one, which is rather nice. So I'm going to shut up for a minute or two, and I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. Shawnee, if you would like to go first, please take us away.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Shawnee Delaney. I'm a former case officer or spy handler, for those that don't know the terminology, for the Defense Intelligence Agency. I've also worked for the Department of Homeland Security in their Industrial Control Systems Cyber Emergency Response Team. You should say that 5 times fast. And it doesn't exist anymore anyway. And I've been an investigator for more than 20 years. And I've basically taken my passion for espionage and insider threat to found my company, Viance Group, which specializes in insider threat, program development, assessment, training. And I'm thrilled to be here. It's good conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for having you. Sean, what you got, sir?
Good morning, guys. Good afternoon. Sean Thompson. I'm a former federal prosecutor, U.S. Attorney's offices, several U.S. Attorney's offices, as well as FBI, NSA, and a couple other 3-letter agencies. Work mainly insider threat espionage cases, was a lead espionage attorney for the FBI. And 6 years ago started ITMG to focus solely on helping corporate America manage insider risk, develop programs, conduct assessments, full range of solution, technical consulting, managed services, and training. So happy to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Sean. Gabrielle, you're up, sir.
So I'm the founder of Wizer, but more interestingly, for this session, I founded Observe-It about 14 years ago. It's a solution that dealt with insider threats. So most of my experience around insider threat is through my work in Observe-It. So I'm going to share some of the things that I learned over there.
Nice, appreciate it. So I'm feeling a little I don't know, tense. I'm sandwiched. I'm looking at the video here. I'm sandwiched between federal prosecution and the other side of the world that I know very, very well. I'm not sure if I should be happy or not. I have pissed off the feds on a regular basis, so I'll put that one out there.
A badge of honor.
All right, so we will start. Yeah, one of many, I think. So let's start with a good one. Let's just kick it off. We talk about insider threat. Some people make a huge deal of it. Some people say there's absolutely nothing to it, and we should always trust everybody on the inside. We have the pair of you, Gabrielle, we've got you as well from the internal side of things. I really would like to know from your observations, from each one of you in the industry, from the observations and general ideas, what do you see in the industry? What do you see in the corporate clients and everybody else around you? And how do you have those discussions with people about what actually is an insider threat and how much of a challenge it is? Shawnee, again, if you don't mind, I will kick off with you on that one.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is that the term itself is such a large umbrella. It encompasses so much. And so one of the challenges is having clients understand what they want to tackle when they are working on insider threat and coming up with their own definition and their own scope, and understanding that they might have to start small and take kind of baby steps to get a solid, holistic program initially.
Got it. How much of an issue do you see of it, though? I mean, when you come into organizations, how much of a struggle is it to get them to understand what an insider threat is? Or do people tend to get it, or do you have to realign them in most cases or in many cases?
Yeah, I think people get it for the most part, but a lot of it is they want to believe that it's not going to happen to them, or their employees would never do something to harm the company. And I think kind of hammering home that it's not just the malicious. People think insider threat and they think malicious, right? Someone's trying to steal your IP, which definitely is the case. But there are so many people who just unintentionally, they click on a phishing link, or they expose the company to something like that, or they're taking shortcuts at home and printing hard copy of the documents and then they recycle them. It's those little things like that it's just important to reinforce that people start paying attention to.
Oh, that makes sense. Sean, again, same thing. You've come at it from a slightly different angle, obviously. I'd love your thoughts on it because it sounds like you've come from the pointy end of the prosecution side of the world.
Yeah, and to echo the sentiment, definitions are key in many scenarios, certainly in defining insider threats. And oftentimes, folks tend to try to define it quite narrowly and try to focus only on the intentional threat. Maybe they have IP that they're trying to protect. So that's really how they're defining insider threat. However, I've always taken a broader approach, and I think you have to take a broader approach. So you have to include everything from fraud to leaking information to the careless, the negligent, reckless insider. You've got to take in the physical theft, the IP theft, the saboteur. It really has to encompass the full range before you can properly manage this threat or manage it in a risk management fashion, as I like to frame it. But for the most part, I think we've gotten past that education problem that when I started ITMG, 6 years ago, we were still in that education phase where people were still like, well, is it a problem? Do I really need to address it? I should be more concerned about the hacker, which is obviously always a concern. But I think we've gotten now to the point and we've matured where most companies, most clients that I work with, that isn't a hard sell. It's really about moving that next step of defining what that threat is and how they want to define their program.
So I'm going to get on my soapbox for about 10 seconds while the dog says hi as well. You're actually talking to a hacker. The guy that's moderating this is actually a hacker. So my soapbox is stop blaming the damn hackers. We're the nice ones. You want to blame somebody that's breaking into shit, they're called criminals or potential criminals. Big one on that one. We have a huge issue in this industry with the ability to actually understand the difference on that side of things. So I will now get off my soapbox for a second. And I'll let the dog eat another snack. By the way, yeah, Shawnee, don't worry about it if the Rugrats show up. I got the big dog that shows up and says hi on a regular basis. Gabrielle, your thoughts on this? Because obviously, I mean, you ran an organization in this side of the world before. So I'd love your thoughts because it sounds like I'm interested from Sean's standpoint that, we've done some education, but I still find a lot of companies still focus on this. Oh, insider threat is all bad stuff. It's like, no, shit just happens.
Yeah, so first of all, insider threat is about risk. So if something happened unintentionally, if somebody didn't mean to do something and put the business at risk, yeah, the intent matters, but they still put the business at risk, and we still need to try to avoid that situation. So I would say most insider threats, if we want to try to categorize it, are probably unintentional, but it doesn't really matter if their unintentional thing caused the company to go bankrupt. So it's really important to understand that insider threat is any risk inside the organization. But on top of that, I would like to add that when you look at insider threat, it's also an economical thing. Everything is intertwined. It's mixed. So cybercrime is using insider threat. So if I am a cyber criminal and I can blackmail somebody inside the organization to give me information, that's just more economical, right? It's just easier than developing sometimes a malware if I can just have somebody inside the company do it for me. If I found some dirt on them on social media because they, share every aspect of their life. So if I can find something on someone, I'll use it against them and slowly, gradually get them to, do more things for me because they basically take risks.
Yeah.
And so it's really also an economical thing. If you have a bigger company, then probably, some people have something on them that a cyber criminal can use. Sometimes it's also, I can have somebody from my team, from the criminal team, be hired. I can have somebody hired into a call center because they have all the customers. So not only somebody from my team is getting paid to work in a call center with access to everyone. So not only it's economical, we're also getting money. So I think people don't understand, the economics around cybercrime in general. They sort of like do these silos. There's like external hack and there's insider threat. Today it's everything mixed.
Yeah. Actually, this is an interesting one, and I'm going to go off the questions for a second. We ran into a situation about a year or two ago where we were investigating something outside of the US. It was in a number of call centers in other countries, and we realized that there were some challenges there with extortion. And again, from an insider threat perspective, I'm interested on that one. Have you, and again, I'll add Sean from you first, if you don't mind on this one. Have you seen like a different types of insider threats on a geographic basis, especially when we start looking at global companies? I'm interested in your thoughts on that one.
I don't think there's any pattern and differences in geography versus US versus Europe that I've seen. I think what I've seen is, and where we try to focus in terms of helping companies detect, is trying to focus on personas, which kind of gets to your question. So diving into those, really it's, what we focus on are kind of three main primary personas would be, the leaver, if you will, those leaving the company, disgruntled, and then the careless individuals. And I think for the most part, if a company was to build a program around those three personas or archetypes and try to identify those people, processes, and technology to help identify and mitigate those personas, companies are going to go a long way towards being able to properly manage risk. We've all probably seen studies out there, and we've all seen research to support people leaving, people they take stuff, right? Whether it's the line worker or the executive. So that's clearly, in my mind, the largest threat. And I've seen that both domestically and overseas as well. There doesn't seem to be any difference, at least in my experience, between the leavers, the disgruntled employees. Those are already under investigation. I mean, that's like easy pickings. If they have an HR investigation or they're already under security investigation, to try to do some focused, some tailored, enhanced monitoring of those individuals. Maybe you grab some logs, pull some PST files, whatever the case may be. But oftentimes that's kind of low-hanging fruit that a lot of companies don't really take advantage of. And that is a difference that I've seen in European companies, much more sensitive to those email issues, monitoring issues. US is a little bit more open to that. So there's some hesitation there to really, I guess, use some of the investigative techniques that otherwise would be available. And then lastly, the careless that we talked about. Clearly, in my experience, as well as research, I agree with Gabby, it supports generally the negligent, right? The reckless employee is the largest insider threat, right? Okay. But they can do just as much damage as anyone else. So they clearly need to be included in that.
Okay, cool. Shawnee, any thoughts from your standpoint from geographical differences? Again, to put it more into context, this is stuff that we pulled out of call centers out of Thailand, and some interesting extortion conversations that came out of there that we've not typically seen inside the US. I'm interested in your experience if you've seen anything like that.
Yeah, so I have actually, and call centers, just like you're talking about in the Philippines in particular.
There we go. Yeah.
But not just that, the trend that I have seen is a real significant increase in organized crime, like external, fraud rings, and internal collusion. And I think a lot of it, especially the past, what are we, 6 months or however many months we're in deep with COVID, is that people have such job insecurity that they are willing to take that additional risk to, if someone approaches them to help, how does your company, mitigate risk, or what are the tools or the checks that they have in place. You were talking about an employee being, someone being hired, inside the company. It's not just getting paid and being that insider. It's also learning those tricks and those loopholes to help those outside criminals and outside fraud rings. I've seen a really large increase in things like that.
Yeah, I was wondering. Okay, that's good to hear. I'm glad I'm not going mad on there. That's yeah, it's one of those interesting. All right, so I want to take a step back. All of us have obviously approached organizations and we have conversations with organizations, and like anything, you always want to try and get in there ahead of a situation. You don't always want to have to go and do the forensics. You also want to try and educate them and see how they have that conversation. We talk about early indicators, and we talk about when we walk in, how do we educate, how do we help people understand early indicators? Talk to me, I'm really interested in what you consider an early indicator, how you would talk to how you would have that conversation about early indicators Sean, you hit it very briefly as well, people, process, and technology. I'm interested in, when you go in, who do you want at the table? Is it IT? Is it IT and others? So give me some thoughts on that one. Shawnee, hit this one off if you don't mind, please.
Yeah, so ideally everyone will be at the table because everyone plays a role to some degree. But for me, early indicators, I like to focus on the human aspect. And again, it's hard with COVID because we're all remote and people are not really working alongside each other to recognize changes in someone's pattern of behavior. But educating people on how to recognize and where to report and how to report when someone they work with has changed that pattern of behavior. I had one case in Miami, actually, where somebody was bumming rides all the time to and from work. They didn't have a car. They lived in like an apartment with a bunch of people. And then very quickly, and I mean within like 2 to 3 weeks, they had bought a new Lexus. They were flashing a watch. They got a new iPhone. And so some really eagle-eyed coworkers ended up reporting that as suspicious. And they didn't work in a call center, but it was a center where you interact with customers. And they did deal with finances. And sure enough, like that person recognized that person had changed that pattern of behavior, and we were able to catch them.
Nice. Sean, thoughts on that?
Yeah, to add to that, I would say, a little bit like I discussed with the lever persona, if you will, but conflicting opportunities is an indicator that I think kind of goes unnoticed. But if someone is leaving for another company, they're changing jobs, maybe they have maybe they're moonlighting on a job, maybe it's approved, maybe it's not approved. But those types of scenarios, those individuals are they're thinking not necessarily in the company's best interest at that point, right? Now, maybe it's approved and maybe it's fine, but if it's not approved and there is no policy for that, clearly that is something that needs to be looked at. I've had several cases where individuals working in large corporations are setting up their side businesses to compete with the company. Just had a large company this past month who had that same type of scenario. Had 3 individuals who were setting up their own company overseas. Direct competition, had actually reached out to the competitor. But as we did the forensics, we discovered there was a lot of communications on LinkedIn, actually, a lot of reaching out, web searching for starting up new corporations. So there were a lot of indicators, as well as the coworkers. There was a lot of as is often the case when something happens, right? Like, oh yeah, he was actually suspicious. He was coming in late. He was asking about how to start up a new company. So there is oftentimes a lot of indicators that I think we could probably get out ahead of more so than we do.
Gabrielle, before I hit you up on this one, so part of my background is threat intelligence, actual threat intelligence, not some of the crap that half our industry sells. And to me, that's where some of this comes in really, really carefully, because obviously we're using the .gov and the .mil space. I just answered a question on this one. We're seeing more corporate organizations bring this in, and a lot of it just, it's give me the full picture. I'm not going to go delving into people's lives, but look, back to the point, if people put stuff on LinkedIn or on Twitter, or they're researching, or you find code on GitHub, and 1,001 other indicators on the public and private side of the world, are either of you seeing more of that get used as part of an investigation? I'm a third open to either of you.
Yes, actually, very much involved with. We've got a vendor that we work with that does a lot of that for companies. We are seeing a lot more of that. People are, and certainly now with the work from home model shift, which I think is a seismic shift, and I don't think it's ever going back to where it was. So you've got your visibility into what your employees, your insiders, those to whom you've given access, has now narrowed considerably, right? Historically, I think companies felt comfortable that the employee was in their space. They were maybe in the cube next to them, down the hall. There was some appearance of security anyway, that they had some visibility. Now that is, for the most part, changed. So I think companies, yes, they're looking at the other aspect of things. It always should have been there, and we've been doing it for a while, this other intelligence, the off-the-grid type of intelligence, if you will. But now I definitely seen an uptick in it, and it's not fraught. It is fraught with, pitfalls, if you will. It's got to be done correctly, of course. But to your point, yes, high uptick in that area.
And I would
Shawnee,
agree.
same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a significant uptick. You'll see, I mean, you all know there are a ton of vendors now that work in that space. Everybody wants a piece of it. And it's not that companies are now more actively watching everybody all the time. It's that they have the tools now and the resources available when someone is raised as a potential threat, that they can bring in those tools. And you've got all this open source information. To me, that's fair game if you're posting that in the public realm. So why wouldn't companies use it?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Gabrielle, any thoughts on that part, or back to the early indicators where we partner up with who around the table, HR, legal, compliance, all those folks?
Yeah, so when you investigate an insider threat, and many times there will be several people in the company that are not surprised by it. You know, they felt something, and the problem is that the anti-snitching culture in general allows those people to keep on going forever, sometimes for years, even though people did feel something is wrong. So I think education is, in this case, is really, really key as a method to actually identify, because those risk indicators are mostly behavioral. And yes, you can see, you know, there's all these UBA companies that do, you know, behavior changes and stuff, but they don't have the context, right? And people do have the context. And, you know, like Shani said, you know, somebody bought in a, you know, in 2 weeks, like this expensive car. So we have to educate people how to report, probably anonymously, so they feel comfortable, how this can also be good for people to report, because some of those people are in a loop. They just can't get out of it because they're being leveraged by an external person. So understanding that education is actually key in detection, I think is key.
Okay, that's fair. All right, so there's actually a really good question. I actually want to have this conversation before we hit some of the other stuff. Shawnee, you both walk into organizations doing this as a role. Who, in your opinion, and Shawnee, I'll throw it at you first, who should own this program? I mean, I know everybody's contributing to it, but who should own this program? And it's a tough one, but I'm interested in thoughts on it. Go for it.
Yeah, so that's $1 million question, and everybody does it differently. Yeah. You're dealing with different companies in different industries with different cultures, so you have to keep that in mind, right? There's no one size fits all. Personally, I really like it to sit under legal somehow. A lot of departments will have global security under legal. I think that works well because you are always, and you should always be consulting with the privacy lawyers and bringing them in. It's just so important. So I'm not saying that's the only way that it works, but it seems that a lot of people are kind of approaching it in that sense. I've seen other weird things too, but that's what I prefer.
It's like IT and InfoSec. We've been thrown all over. We're like the red-headed stepchild. They're like, yeah, we'll put you over here somewhere, and it normally invariably breaks. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll put you under the CFO, and there'll always be money challenges. We'll put you under the CIO, which means it's the fox guarding the hen house. Yeah, legal and compliance, honestly, is where we like going, to be perfectly honest. All right, Sean, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel very strongly if the chief risk officer role in a company is more broad than simply the strategic business risk at the high level, which some organizations, that's what the CEO role is, right? Other organizations, they're more operational, much more granular. If that's the case, then I think the insider threat program, as should be managed under a risk management framework, should sit under the CRO. They often have direct lead to the audit committee, highest levels of the organization, CFOs, every other chief executive in the company. So I've seen it work extremely well under that type of scenario. Most companies aren't set up that way. Number two would be the chief security officer. I don't like so much the CISO because oftentimes, as you mentioned, Chris, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there, I think. They're there to keep things running, essentially, especially if they report to the CIO. I have seen it work pretty well with the CISO if they are somewhat independent, right? They're not necessarily reporting to the CIO, they're reporting directly to maybe one of the committees, maybe the CEO themselves. And in that scenario, since they obviously manage the networks, They've obviously probably got a fairly mature SOC system already, so it does work pretty well there. Legal and compliance, that can work. I think there's some challenges there, perhaps historically or maybe innately from a legal standpoint. They want to say no more than yes. So I think you do run into those challenges. I would say my experience, the worst that I've seen it is under HR. I think you're doomed to fail if it's an HR. HR, they have their role, right? They often find their role as advocates of the employee, which is nothing wrong with that, of course. They're trying to bring people in, create a nice corporate environment, but it doesn't lend itself towards this type of process. So.
Got it. That makes sense. Shawnee, you were going to thumbs up. Go for it.
I just want to say that no matter who or no matter what organization you decide to put it under, the most important thing is to really build those relationships and educate that team to understand what it is, why it's important, how it will help you, how it will help your company, and really, to use one of my old terms, to recruit them, to get them on board. Because even if it's under legal, or even if, God forbid, it's under HR, if they understand all of the whys and hows, you'll get more support.
Got it. So here's something I want to talk about. Let's talk about corporate culture. Because to me, and there's actually Run it actually put this question out there, and to me, this plays into it a lot, or in my mind, it plays into a lot. I'm really intrigued to see from all three of you where it plays in. And Gabrielle, I'm going to hit you first with this one. But again, do me a favor, everybody keep questions and answers to a minute because we're getting some stuff coming in from people, if you don't mind. So I'm interested in corporate culture. How much does the culture of the organization impact this? And I'll add some extra color into this in a minute. Gabrielle, kick it off, please, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so when I started observing about 14 years ago, people were just pushing back because I trust my employees no matter what. In the past 5 years, this has changed. You can still trust them, but you can still, put some controls in place and make sure they're not doing some bad thing for different reasons. I think if people understand that it's also for the benefit of the employees, because sometimes if somebody was recruited, like usually the person that recruited them will use them until they go to jail. So like
keep it in corporate culture. I want to know how the culture of the corporation affects maybe potential people turning or not turning.
You mean like how somebody will turn to an insider threat because of the culture?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, you know as well as I do. I mean, there are some companies where you walk into it and you're like, okay, I feel part of the family. I feel like I belong here. HR loves me. Legal's great. They kind of say in the background, everything's good. And you got other companies, you're like, holy shit, these guys are going to turn on a dime, especially in how we see today. That's what I want to focus on.
Okay, so I don't have really good data on this. Maybe
okay.
Sean or Shani can have more insight on this. But one thing I know that it's really depends on the person, right? If somebody has, is into drugs or whatever, things can get complicated and somebody can recruit them. So I'm sure that there is more stress from work, and if somebody is disgruntled because of the corporate culture, that adds more. But I don't have numbers on this.
Okay, Shawnee, go for it.
Yeah, so from my experience, corporate culture is like one of the key things that you have to factor in when you're building a program. So let's say, for example, you're going into a tech company, and traditionally, stereotypically, tech is, we hug it out, we trust, everybody's good. They don't want, privacy legal is going to have an issue. Gabrielle, I've tried to get Observit in a specific company, a tech company, and they had a heart attack because, God forbid, we have any sort of logging, keystroke logging or video, or oh my gosh, that's privacy, right? But then if you go into like a pharma company or a company that does contracting with the government, they understand need to know, right? That culture teaches them, and the background and experience of those employees is totally different. So when you're approaching those different industries and those different cultures, you're going to have to tailor your training, your policy, your comms. Everything's going to have to tailor so that those employees can take it and take it and digest it properly, right? If you come into a tech company with a government contractor mentality, it will fail miserably.
Interesting. How's that? Okay, so let's add to that one, because again, is age of a company have anything to it, or is it purely because of the market or the area they're in? I mean, I'm really, because I mean, you're right, you've got a lot of the Valley, the SF Valley, and various other like tech hubs, whereas you're right, it's hug it out or we're all good and I'm going to provide you snacks to keep you happy. Whereas, let's be honest, I mean, I've worked for some fairly large companies, which it's nothing more than it's a human meal at the end of the day, and they just don't care. You don't feel like they care.
And that's true. I mean, I think to their credit now, and again, I'm going to go back to COVID because it's shifted things so much, but companies, especially in the tech sector, maybe in financial sector a little bit too, have really started realizing that if they're not keeping their employees' mental health first and foremost, that they are going to have more insider threat programs. And so they're starting to offer more resources, free resources, free mental health. It's not just EAP, right? There's really proactive things that they're offering their employees, and I think they're completely on the right track. So age of company, I think to a degree fits in, because usually the older companies have employees that have been there, you know, maybe I'm stereotyping, but 20, 30 years, right? Mm-hmm. So to use an old government term, like those are dinosaurs compared to the millennials that are running, these tech companies. So right. You've got to get in the mentality. Plus, are you working with scientists who like to share and they want to tell everyone just how smart they are? Or are you working with people who, it's that need to know. They don't want to share. They understand that they
You've come out of the super secret squirrel shit, so you understand that. Yeah, absolutely. All right, that makes sense. Sean, give me some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, many layers to this culture onion, right? I mean, if you come at it from the perspective of how does a culture potentially promote or mitigate the risk of insider or threats occurring? We've had several clients who we just had one 6 months ago where we went in, did a full assessment. They had a high rate of both fraud, IP theft, and leaking. And as a result of the assessment, one of our findings was, well, you have a 40% turnover rate in 2 years, which was obviously extremely high. The company themselves kind of knew it was higher, but they didn't realize it was that high, or at least the people that should know it was that high. So that was clearly a finding. We were able to, even in the last 6 months, drastically reduce those incidents just by making them aware of that, obviously bringing HR to the table, helping them try to smooth out some of those, hug it out type of, let's make everyone feel a little bit more part of the culture in a positive way. They weren't really doing a lot of those things. They didn't have a good support network for employees. So certainly we've seen that side. Certainly from the other side of culture, how a program like this affects the culture is huge as well. We had another client who had a lot of engineers, a lot of PhDs. Actually, 80% of their workforce were PhDs. Large financial hedge fund firm, and they're not too keen on people monitoring their stuff, right? They want to know that they're trusted. They're PhDs, right? They're ones and zeros guys. They don't like being feeling like they're being monitored. So that wasn't really an option to go in and throw an endpoint tool on to do screen sessions. So we had to work other areas, which we were able to do. But so culture certainly impacts what can be done. And then, of course, you've got your Silicon Valley companies that we've mentioned a little bit. There's other issues there with, how far things can go. So, yeah, culture is right in the door. We've got to determine, and I advise, all my consultants when we go in, that's kind of one of the first things we have to figure out is what is their culture? Because for the most part, that's not something that they're asking us to change, nor do we really want to necessarily, do a sea change with that. Of course, we're there to try to help them manage their risk within the current framework. So it's about finding what that culture is and, developing those processes around it.
Okay, cool. I appreciate it. All right. So I want to take it to the next level. And there's actually a couple of questions that have come up. I'm also going to reference a story that was in the news this week. I decided I love my employees. I think they're wonderful. I'm really glad they're working for me, but I don't trust them. I want to verify and then maybe trust, but I want to do a continuous loop on this. I'm going to implement something. I'm going to implement something that sits on the computer, monitors, does what it needs to, reports extraneous. I'm going to go do threat intelligence. I'm going to pull that data. Do I tell them? Yes or no? Gabrielle, you start on this one.
Well, yeah, well, so my point of view is that you tell them. I don't like, again, this is a personal view. I don't like being sneaky about it. I think it's also important to let people know how the data will be accessed. For example, at Observe It back then, you had to have two keys to open a video. So if something happened, you had to have, for example, somebody from legal and somebody from the IT security, for example, both give consent to actually watch the recording. That was like one option. Another option was to allow the employee to know what was recorded, so they can request sort of like, you know, a mini GDPR, like I want to have access to what was recorded. Again, it depends on how you implement this, but definitely this is something that, you know, can impact culture. I think eventually people will figure it out. So if you don't tell anyone, I think that's probably going to be for the worst. Because once people find it out, then the trust levels start to drop significantly. So I would just be explaining why we're doing it. They're not gonna, I personally didn't like doing it for productivity. It was more for security. So I never loved the idea of like, you know, let's see if people are working or not. So again, if you tell people that and you tell them that they can see what was recorded and you can tell them that you can have those, you know, there's a process to actually watch what happened and there has to be a legal, you know, reason for that. Then I think it's, you know, I think it's totally fine. Well, that's what we've done for like, you know, 14 years. But that's my take on it.
All right, appreciate it. Sean, give me 30 seconds answer.
Short answer, yes. Transparency is key. If you later employees find out you're doing certain things, getting to the culture issue, that's going to blow up in your face. The legitimacy of the program itself depends on buy-in not only from the executives in charge, but the employees themselves. So full transparency, always top of mind with us when we go in on engagements. Again, that doesn't mean describing in detail all sources and methods, but providing them a general understanding, whether that's in onboarding or annual or quarterly awareness training, that there is a program there to protect the company, to protect you, not necessarily to, you know, investigate you and to follow you around and to be big brother, but it's to protect the company. So absolutely, full transparency.
Okay, Shawnee, give me some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so I agree with both of them. You have to be transparent. It takes one insider who's aware of the program to leak it to the rest of the company or to the media, and then you're screwed, right? I don't think there's any other way around it. To Sean's point, you do not tell them every little detail about what it's doing, but you have to explain the benefits up front, right? The benefits to the company, the benefits to the individuals, because if someone is stealing your intellectual property, everyone's going to suffer, right? Your stocks are going to suffer, whatever it is. So making them understand the why, not just we do this, suck it up. It's why we do it.
Yeah, okay.
And your job might suffer, right? I mean, there are plenty of cases where companies have, you know, lost 80% of their workforce because of property theft. You know, the wind turbine case, Chinese stealing wind turbine technology. That company lost 80% of their employees. The stock value plummeted. So, yeah.
Got it. No, appreciate it. So here's an interesting dichotomy, and it's something we ran into. Part of the stuff I've done in the past has been deception technology, and that's both inside an organization and outside, various different things on this one. Rarely, if ever, did we actually inform most people what was going on. We kept it very close, very guarded. We sowed deception in, credential systems, the whole lot. Part of the logic was the benefits of having deception tech basically be landmines inside an organization versus the not so much benefits of telling everybody, hey, we've got traps all over the place. And we weren't looking for insiders, we were looking much more for people being able to get in. At that point, the benefit of telling people didn't outweigh the risks of telling people. Whereas in this, do you see any downsides in telling people they're being monitored? I mean, it's obvious, but what downsides do you see? Any thoughts, Shawnee? Again, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so let's say I am a malicious insider and I'm trying to commit fraud against my company and I learn that they're monitoring me. I'm going to take my stuff, you know, maybe I'm not a smart bad person. I'm going to take my stuff offline. I'm going to, use my phone to take screenshots of the, pictures of the screen, or I'm going to change my tactics. So it's going to be harder to catch people. That's the biggest downside I can see.
Got it. Okay, Sean, thoughts on that one?
Yeah, very little downside. I would say it's much more of a deterrence, right? To that same individual like Shawnee referenced. Yeah, they might take it offline, but at least they could do that already, right? So you're at least deterring them from making it easier for them to do on the network using those sources. So I think it's much more of a deterrence, and the risk of not, as we've discussed, far outweighs the benefits that might exist.
Got it. Any thoughts to add on that one, Gabrielle, at all?
No, sort of the same. Deterrence, I think, is a big. I think it's an advantage to some degree. So, yeah.
Right. And actually, somebody just put, Kerry just put a good point out there that, look, as you onboard people as part of the employee manual, as part of the training, hey, look, this is what we do, this is why we do it, and this is how we do it. I think that's a really good point that they made, definitely. All right, so here's a question. Oh, go on, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say that that's a really good point, because when you try to change something that employees are used to, like, or take away their freedoms or take away their access, as you all have seen, it causes problems. So that's a great point, because starting from the very beginning, they have the understanding that they're being monitored and why.
So here's something, again, from the safety security side. We unfortunately go in, we try to educate people, we try to have the conversations about, hey, look, here's what you need to do, here's how you should do it. Everybody's like, oh, absolutely, love this idea. But invariably, nobody does a bloody thing about it until they get their ass handed to them. Similar experiences, or do you find more people like, oh, I love this idea before they get their ass handed to them? Any thoughts on this one? Sean, go first on this one, then Shawnee, you're up next.
You mean in terms of responding to an incident versus trying to be proactive?
Yeah, it's that, what is it? Answer prevention, a pound of cure, or whatever it is.
Yeah, we've seen, again, just referencing our, our experience with our company, we've seen a definite uptick in that. 6 years ago, it was more, we were getting more calls. We had an incident, come in and help us fix, and then create processes to help prevent it again. Now I would say it's more, I would say 60-40. It's probably more of that preventative approach where they want to get ahead of it. We're still getting the calls if something has happened, come and help us, but we're seeing an uptick in people trying to, get ahead of the curve, if you will.
Got it. Shawnee, thoughts on that?
I would say what I've seen is about 50-50, actually. People still really are reactive, and when they realize that they just got screwed, they realize what they need to fix it in the future, prevent it in the future. Yeah, it's an even split.
We're not seeing that still in the InfoSec industry. It's still, I would argue, especially with the amount of ransomware, it's ridiculous how many people either don't know, don't think about it until it's too late. Gabrielle, any thoughts on this one? I mean, you've run companies into this, especially in the early days.
So like I said, in the early days, it was almost impossible. So when we started, we said, okay, forget about your insiders. What about your external partners? That's how we started. Everybody wanted to monitor them, which we, by the way, include in the insider threat in general. They're the partners. But I think what's happening today, there's also more regulations that require this. And this creates, there's also some good in that, right? It creates proactiveness. So we see that, and I think also people start to understand that an insider threat program is also good for the overall security posture. If you pitch it right, you're going to get so much more benefit, because, like we said, insider threat is not just malicious, it's also unintentional. So if you handle this right and you have collaboration between teams, you just get so much better flow of information regarding security threats in the organization, and your overall security posture is just extremely strengthens.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense on that one. That we did in time with. So there's a couple of fantastic questions that I'm actually going to hit another one that we've just come up on this one as well. I mean, Shawnee and Sean, I assume both of you deal with companies that have to deal with both US, Europe, Middle East, APAC, and everything else. How do you balance those changes in surveillance capabilities, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and everything else? That's Howard to put you on the spot, but if you can kind of wrap it quickly, that would be fantastic. Shawnee, you're up first if you don't mind.
Yeah, just real simply, they have to tailor what they're collecting or what they're monitoring per country or per region. So we are not going to have all the tools available in Europe that we would in the United States, period.
Do you have that well defined? So if I come to you as a client and go, hey, I've got stuff all over the world, I'm in 15 different countries. Do you literally have a fairly accurate playbook that says, in this country we have to adhere to GDPR, in this country you've got privacy, in this? Do you have that fairly well sorted for companies?
Yeah, generally, like I'm not a specialist in every country in the world, but yeah, generally, you know where the problem countries are for sure.
Can imagine. Sean, thoughts on that one? Similar kind of thoughts?
Yeah, and we do, as part, have created our playbooks for each of those regions, as you've mentioned. So we've done a lot of work with the works councils overseas, which is foreign to a lot of domestic companies, which we don't have to go through those employee-led bodies that per GDPR. But there are special restrictions or special procedures for that. It generally takes longer, and it helps to obviously kind of know those landmines right away. Dealing with the larger clients, obviously, they have a generally overseas counsel as well. So we've established those relationships so we can kind of hit the ground running. But to your point, yeah, it's got to be tailored. You've got to know ahead of time the processes that you need to kind of prioritize to get that moving, because it will take longer as a U.S. corporation to implement some surveillance in APAC, even China, anywhere. Germany certainly is probably the longest with their privacy laws.
So let me take a slight step back again. We talked a couple of times about early indicators. We talked about change of behavior, change in habits, change in spending, change in lifestyle. Is there at any point during this, and Gabrielle, you kind of hit this one, and Sean, I think we've all kind of hit this a little bit, is there any way that we can counsel and help educate? Because again, we look at what we're doing for Wizer, and we look at how can we educate, how can we train and teach people either not to put themselves in situations or to be aware of situations, or if they get into a situation, what can they do about it? Almost pressing that panic button under the table we do in financial institutions. Any thoughts on that one? Have any of you actually dealt with those, and have you seen them be successful? Shawnee, you're up first if you don't mind.
Yeah, so it's actually similar, it kind of parallels the culture topic, right? So I'm going to talk about scientists, for example. So when you have a lot of scientists, people who do R&D, they tend to mind their own business, right? They're focused on their work. And again, these are stereotypes, but they generally follow the patterns. So having an education program, so when you're doing an awareness campaign of we have an insider threat program now, and this is what it is, this is why it's good for you in the company, having parts of that teach them like that you need to start observing your fellow coworkers. And these are some things, these are red flag indicators you need to pay attention to, and this is why. And it's not just, you're not ratting them out. You have to change, you might have to shift that culture a little bit into helping them understand that they're not narcs, that they could potentially be helping someone with really serious mental health issues, and getting the company to intervene on their behalf. They can report anonymously, make them know that they can do that, make them know how they can do that, and where they can go to do that, making sure the company has those resources. But it's critical, in my opinion, to really spend a lot of time on educating people on what to look for. And then also, real quickly, I'll add case studies. Using case studies from your own organization are really, really impactful. Anonymized, but really impactful.
All right, that makes a ton of sense. Again, it's turning it from I'm ratting somebody out to, I mean, we do it we already have that with mental health hackers. It's a very, very aware thing, because a lot of us are former .mil.gov. We know the statistics. We know how many people in the industry take their own lives because they can't deal or aren't able to process effectively what's happening around them. And so you change that mentality from I'm not going to ask anything to I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to press until I get a better answer. And yeah, I think it's the same kind of thing by the sounds of it. Okay, interesting. Sean, similar thoughts? Any additional thoughts on that one?
Yeah, adding this type of insider threat, holistic content, I'll call it, to the onboarding, to the quarterly training is key. We've had a lot of good experience with that, and the stats that we've keep as we work with these companies, it generally drops 50 to 60% in their rates of careless people, stupid human tricks, or even rates of their insider activities, whether it's leaking or fraud. It almost in all cases has gone down precipitously as a result of the training, because we mentioned most of the insiders are negligent, right? Reckless. They're not intentional. So understanding how to act, how to not click on that link, how to report, all of those things have a direct and positive impact on the overall risk landscape.
Okay, awesome. Gabrielle, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just to add to what Shani said, I think it's mostly, you educate about the early risk indicators, but I think it's very important to teach people how to report, because they just don't know. What do I do? Who do I go to? So have a process, different companies do different things. You can, advise people to maybe use, an external email. So even though you do want to be able to get back to them, there are different processes of how to do that. But once you give people the process of how to do it, and you also explain that they're not going to be sacked, the person is going to be only maybe we're just collecting that and do something with that later. So explain to people how to report and what will happen and why we're doing it.
Can I add one added benefit too? Is that when you train people what to look for, when you start getting walk-ins, as we can call it, or employee referrals, internal referrals, what I've experienced as an investigator is that the rate of true positives is exponentially higher than the false positives or the incorrect. So you're going to start getting more walk-ins, and you're going to see your cases start to increase because people are paying attention.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. It's trying to figure it all. All right, so here's another question, and then we'll get on to final comments and stuff like that. My background, I'm a hacker. Let's face it, I break in, I look for data. If I can find the treasure trove of information that you're monitoring on every other single person on the planet, it's almost probably as nice as me finding access to Active Directory. I now have all the dirt on all the people. How do you coach or teach or train the companies and organizations you work for to effectively safeguard as best as they can the data that they are collecting on people? Sean, you hit this one first, if you don't mind.
So regarding, you talking about the employee data? Are you talking about the crown jewels of the company? Or both?
Crown jewels I'll deal with. I want to talk about the stuff that we're dealing with here, the stuff you're collecting on people. Yeah,
so again, that's generally most of the tools will have pretty good safeguards in place, like Gabby just mentioned, the observance and everything. They'll have the compliant, they'll be compliant, they'll have the processes. The other thing is you got to create a watch the watchers processes in place. You got to have some people. You can't have as you said initially, you can't have the hens guarding the hen house, if you will. So you've got to have some proper program is really what it comes down to understand that those that have access to information are also being watched, and there's checks and balances in place. Supervisors know who's watching who, and as Gabby mentioned initially, there's different levels. If you want to go and pull some PST files, that might be legal review right away, right? If you want to go and ask for some enhanced monitoring, different legal review. So I guess the shortened answer to your question, it's got to be part of a program, a process, right? And that's got to be properly messaged to employees and executives.
Okay. Gabrielle, I mean, you built Observer. Talk to me about how you made sure that I didn't have an easy time getting to your data.
Yeah, so, first of all, those check and balances, but definitely, the first days of Observe, I guess, we didn't have all the security controls, but as the company grows, so especially in this case, I think it's, again, I'm not trying to sell now, Observe it for, for people, but do look for tools that actually have controls in place and encrypt the data and have those, double keys and consents, because we're talking about very sensitive data that the last thing that we want is, Chris, for you, if you were a bad actor to come in and, and look at it, because that's sort of like, a treasure trove for a social engineer if they have access to what people are doing, to all the projects and all of that. And I think it's
Right.
also important to know, going back to what you asked before about privacy and, Europe, do you actually know what you're recording? It's important. Do you have structured, because in many cases, if you don't know what you're recording, you may be recording things that you definitely don't want
Didn't know how to. Yeah.
to keep. So
Yeah.
so that's, again, that's sometimes why you want to, it's not only about monitoring, it's about exactly what you spoke about.
Okay. Shawnee, you're smiling on this one. Go for it.
Yeah, I can say just real quickly, have a data access policy, right? So make sure that employees know it. If you have a database where people are accessing PII, make a pop-up where it reminds them that we have a policy and what they're accessing is only for business justification, business needs. Real simple.
Yeah, it's found too much stuff sitting on open S3 buckets with password 1 exclamation mark as the bloody way into it. It's not pretty. Don't want to find that stuff on there. All right, so I got one question which is slightly off cuff on this one, and actually came in from somebody else. We talk a lot about people in the industry, people getting into the industry. If somebody looks at this and goes, holy smoke, this is an awesome area, I really want to focus on it, I really want to look at it, I want 4 or 5 bullet points, 2 or 3 bullet points of what they need to be doing, where they need to be focusing, what they need to be learning, training. Do they have to come from an le.mil.gov super secret squirrel shit background? Give me some thoughts on this one. I'm interested. Shawnee, you kill us away on this one.
Yeah, so I don't think you have to have a law enforcement or a federal government background. You can learn. This is something you can learn, right? There are programs that offer certificates. Carnegie Mellon has a really great, just a basic program. I would read every article you can get your hands on, every case study, everything that comes out in the news. I would network my ass off with people on LinkedIn that are in the industry and see if someone will mentor you. I would try to get your foot in the door in a job, even if it's lower level, learning how the program works. I would actually start taking lessons learned from other jobs that you've had and start thinking about the culture and thinking about those challenges in that industry or the organization that you worked in and how you would apply insider threat program to that. And those are just some thoughts.
Cool, awesome. Sean, you want to add some more onto this?
Yeah, it's cross-functional, right? So there's no one specific, role that you need to have to be involved in this, right? It has to include everything from HR to legal to privacy, CISOs, engineers, run the gamut. So, I've seen successful program managers come from the IT background, right? They've come from the CISO shop. They were engineers. They were SOC analysts. I've seen them come from, IC background as good analysts. I've seen them come from HR. HR having a good concept of how the company works and moving forward. I've seen them come from risk. So in terms of that, having a broad experience, educating yourself if you're starting out and just understanding corporate structure, policy, kind of how that works will go a long way towards helping someone kind of break into this area, because you'll understand how things are maybe supposed to work, and then you can latch on to the program, which is likely, again, going to be cross-functional. It's going to include everyone across the agency.
Gabrielle, it sounds like it's the same stuff we've been talking about in the IT: communication, collaboration, cooperation, coordination. Same things.
When you answer that, I'll just add that it's really interesting. So you get to deal with, a lot of things, and it's about human behavior. So I really urge anybody that has, slightly interest in this to, try it out. I think we need more people that are dealing with this topic. And I promise you, it's really, really fascinating and interesting thing to learn and to do.
Cool.
I guess one thing I would add is that the analysts are increasing tenfold within private sector corporations. Insider threat analyst is now starting to become kind of a defined work role. It used to just be general analyst or SOC cyber analyst, but we're seeing a lot more of dedicated insider threat analysts, and a lot of those can be entry level. So there's a lot of good opportunities.
Cool. All right, we have hit the top of the hour. I would love some final comments from everybody, and then we will bid adieu to the audience and to everybody. So we'll go in reverse order on this one. Sean, you're up first. Final comments.
So yeah, the industry is, as we discussed, is growing. Companies are creating more higher level executives, creating programs, creating executive insider risks, insider threat directors. There's more opportunities. Companies are starting to get it. And then on the operational last point, think of cross-functional. Don't think of this as a program that just has to be under one entity, whether it's CISO, CSO, or CIO. This is a cross-functional component entity, so you've got to think about it in those terms.
Okay, awesome. Gabrielle?
I think it's, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to, it's not a 0 or 1. You either have or don't. You can take baby steps. And I think, we invested so much in external security. And I think all those small steps that we do within the insider threat realm, there's just so much value to tap into over there, and in order to strengthen our overall security. So I really urge everyone to, take a look at this.
Awesome.
It's
Shawnee?
uncapped value. That's all it is.
Shawnee, please feel free to take it away.
Yeah, so I think if you have humans working for you, you need an insider threat program. And if you don't have a budget, that's okay, because you can still build something, even if it's that baby step, to start educating your employees, to teach them what to look for, and to build the foundation for the program before you do get a budget. Anything is possible. You just have to take it seriously.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right, to the three of you, Sean, Shawnee, Gabrielle, much appreciated. To everybody that was listening and hanging out, answer some of the fantastic questions from people. Thank you very, very much. This has been another Wizer production. So everybody have a good rest of the day, evening, and morning, wherever you are. Again, thank you very, very much, everybody. Much appreciated for joining us and for hanging out. It was a fantastic conversation. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.